If I had a nickel for every time I heard the phrase, earn a living,
Nonsense.
I would have a ton of nickels.
There is another way.
It's totally absurd.
In fact, there are probably infinite other ways.
It has been around too long.
So let's start with just one way.
It should have been chucked in the bin a long time ago. Hello and welcome to Truth Be Told. This is episode 98. Can you believe it? 98. And so this month, our topic is Nacho Mama's abundance. And we're talking about just kind of this new way of viewing abundance. The kind of this prosperity versus abundance and what that really means. Kind of getting beyond, the dollars and all the material things. And what does that really mean to be abundant? And so tonight we are talking about learn your living. Now, you heard that correct. I know you probably think I said earn your living, but nope. Tonight we're going to be talking about learn your living. And so this is new idea, this idea that, oftentimes we operate in kind of the same old thing that we've always operated in. Kind of like when you go to a restaurant, maybe you get the chips and salsa. And maybe that salsa is that kind of mild salsa, and you're used to it. You're comfortable with it, just like we're comfortable with some of the systems and frameworks that we've been operating in. But then that really spicy, colorful salsa catches your eye, and you're like, hey, I wonder what it would be like to try some of that. And so that's what we're talking about. What would it be like to begin to shift from some of these maybe old ways or dusty ways that we have been viewing abundance and what that means and how that shows up for everyone? Maybe it's time to put those aside and really step into some new and exciting ways of looking at abundance, looking how that can show up for everyone equally. And so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of Truth Be Told.
Did y'all know it is National Taco Day? In honor of Taco Day, why shouldn't you trust tacos? Because they always spill the beans. And why did the baby jalapeno shiver? Because it was a little chilly.
So this week, we're talking about learn your living. Now I'm going to talk about the stale chips and dip version of this. And by stale, I mean has been around too long and should have been chucked in the bin a long time ago version. If I had a nickel for every time I heard the phrase, earn a living, well, I would have a ton of nickels. So let's take a minute to break down this phrase and its meaning. And I think you'll begin to realize what I have. It's totally absurd. I was gonna say something else, but I decided to keep it PG. Okay, so earn, which is defined as to receive as return for effort and especially for work done or services rendered. Definition 2, to come to be duly worthy of or entitled or suited to. And definition 3 of this idea of earn means to make worthy of or obtain for. Okay, let's move to the word living, which can be defined as having life, exhibiting the life or motion of nature, the condition of being alive. So if we put those two words together, earn and living, the literal understanding of this phrase means, and I'm paraphrasing in a bit, is to be worthy of life. We use this phrase all the time, whether individually or collectively, to explain and describe the process and necessity for us to do something outside of ourselves in order to live. We have created systems in which the very basic necessities for us to live, food, water, shelter, safety, are monetized. therefore creating the need to earn. Let me say this again, because for me, the more I say it, the more ridiculous it sounds. Like, how did we even get to this place? We have created systems in which the very things that are required for life are considered commodities, products to be bought and acquired. This way of operating leaves huge, and I mean could drive a planet through huge holes and disparities. It creates pockets of these folks have enough and these folks don't. What we learned last week is the reality that there is more than enough for everyone. It's the distribution of that more than enough that is a little sketchy. Through this lens, we have created the idea that some are worthy and some are not worthy of the basic things that are needed not only to thrive, but to actually survive. Like being a human being is not enough. You have to earn and prove your worth. Then you will get the basic things that are needed for you to live. But what if we could do it differently?
It is no secret when we look at our world that conflict, polarization, and a framework of discontent abounds.
What if that didn't have to be?
What if that didn't have to be?
What if that didn't have to be?
The truth is that underneath it all is our innate hardwiring for love, connection, and belonging.
In our ever-evolving experience, now is the time.
Now is the time.
Is the time to unlearn societal constructs of the past.
And relearn what it means to be human.
To be human.
What it means to be human and a part of the global community.
This can only be done together.
This can only be done together.
This can only be done together.
We are being called to pack away the us versus them mentality and instead embrace the profound power of we.
Join Soul Evolution Collaborative.
Join Soul Evolution Collaborative
for the O-Shift Healing the Divide Summit,
November 14th through 17th.
November 14th through the 17th.
This event, through powerful speakers, engaging workshops, and collective conversation, will explore the transformative effects of healing the divide.
Now is the time for change.
Now is the time for healing.
Now is the time for healing the divide.
Enough about this idea that you have to earn a living. If you take a moment to think about what that phrase is actually saying, or even what we tend to mean when we say it, it doesn't take too much to realize that it is nonsense. There is another way. In fact, there are probably infinite other ways. So let's start with just one way. What if we flip the idea of needing to earn a living to learn your living? The simple fact that you are here says that you have a right to life. That through being born, you were immediately and inherently given the right to all aspects of being alive. The moment you took your first breath, the laws of nature bestowed upon you the right to life. The right to access as much of life to the degree that you desire to be alive. The right to be here. The right to have your basic human needs met. The right to have your intricate and complex human needs met. The right to be in relationship with the rest of life. The right to be of value. And so much more. So then what would it even mean to earn your living? All of the things we're trying to earn, we're born with. In many ways, we learn the direct opposite of these rights, that we can only access so much of life, that perhaps we don't have a right to be here, to take up space, that perhaps we are not deserving of having our needs met, that perhaps our relationship to life is what someone else tells us it should be, or that we don't have a choice in our relationship to the world around us, that somehow we need to earn our value. And this right here is the point of leverage in the matter, the fulcrum that gives us the strength to lift ourselves out of this way of thinking and into a new way of thinking. As long as we allow the world outside of ourselves to determine what we believe, then we are at the mercy of what the world decides. However, and here is your fulcrum, when we look inside to determine what we believe about ourselves and the nature of the world around us, then we get to take part in actively co-creating the world around us. And this is how we learn our living, not through hard work and long hours, but through learning about the nature of the world around us. And maybe more importantly, learning about our own nature. Who are you as a person? And what are you doing here? What are you doing here? What are we doing here? Why are any of us here? Why is life here? These are some big questions that maybe don't really have an answer, or at least not one answer. Although it does seem like inherent in those questions is at least part of the answer. Learning your living is learning about yourself, why you are here, what your relationship is to life, in order to understand the nature of the life and the world around us, in order to uncover our truest sense of living. The more you understand yourself, the more you understand the world. And the more you understand the world, the more you understand yourself. And the more both of these things happen, the greater your sense of livingness. The more life that seems to be available to you. Our sense of living is never something that we have to earn. It is available in abundance through naturally occurring universal laws. Our living is what we learn it to be.
This is a good one. This is a good topic.
Yeah, doesn't it I like the topics where we look at these ideas that we've kind of just kind of accepted by default. I mean, or not even just ideas, but just the things we say, the things, how we approach certain things, like earn a living. I probably said that 100 times, how am I going to earn a living, or what job is going to help me earn a living, or what do you do to earn a living? Those questions that,
Yeah.
And so, whereas it may seem that we kind of get too like in the weeds with the language, I think the language is important because behind it is that energy. And so really looking at the things that we believe, the things that we bought into, all along, and looking at them in the here and now and say, okay, does that still work? Does that still fit? Does that still pass this bar of how we want to show up, as individuals, and how we want to show up collectively? Are the things that we believed, or the things I believe, I'll just speak for myself, have the things that I believe, do they really support the thriving of all people, and sometimes not. And so I think that's the value of looking at these things. And then okay, we see it and we really want to change it and show up in a different way. So what's that different way? And so I think that's the power in these conversations. Sometimes you can identify where the hole is before you can sew it up, or before you can repair it. And I think, there is value in that conversation.
Yeah. I'm fascinated. I kind of think probably for this whole month, because I think I said like this exact same thing last week, but worth repeating. I'm fascinated by this month-long conversation and how it's evolved so far, because I think it's one of those places where there is a lot of evolution looking to be uncovered in terms of how spiritual communities, how New Thought talks about this topic, right? And the idea of money and finances and prosperity, and somehow how that's felt separate from abundance, and like what is it that we really, what do I really think and believe about all this? What is it that these philosophies actually say about it? Essentially, like, how does universal principle, how does, like, universal laws, how do those play out through this finances, prosperity, abundance conversation? And why I say I'm fascinated by it, because what I have found is, we've spent so much time the last couple of months, like, breaking down universal principle and then building them back up through the topics for the month.
Right.
And the conversations we've had throughout the months have supported and uplifted my thoughts around the universal principles, right? It's like, oh yeah, wow, we build it back up, and I understand it even stronger, even deeper. Like, that makes so much sense. And it brings a greater understanding around that thing. And what I'm finding is that with, like, specifically money, because I think, like, prosperity is like code word for, we mean money. Like, we say prosperity, we mean money.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's meant by that.
Yeah.
Typically, when you're saying prosperity, it's like the zeros.
Yeah, prosperity class. Oh, the money class, or whatever, right? Like, but like abundance has been like this separate, like, oh, the world of abundance. The world is abundant in terms of, like, all this other stuff, and that is absolutely true. Like, the amount of breathable oxygen, the amount of water, abundant, like massive numbers. And we've talked a lot about that already in some of our weekly stuff anyway. But how does that play out in terms of finances and like money? Like, how does this, does what we as a whole have said about money in the past, how does that play out in terms of, like, universal principles? And when we break it down, it kind of feels like it's not going to build back up the same way.
Well, and even in this conversation, it's like, in the conversation about learning a living and, versus earning a living, it kind of comes into, like, what is valued and where is that value found. And so this idea that I have to earn a living, so earn these things, earn my ability to move within the world in a way that is supports thriving. Yeah, it's like when we're having to look, and I think this goes back to, like, what we talked about a couple of months ago, like when you're having to look outside yourself to support your worth. Then it's always going to be on shaky ground, because anything outside of us is something that can be given and taken away. And so to base our worth and our value and how we see ourselves in conjunction to this idea of a universe that's always supporting us, it gets a little sketchy when it's based on it is equal to, like, if I can earn a living, then I'm whatever.
Right.
But it's interesting because the systems that we're in support that very fact. And so, like, if you don't have the money to buy X, Y, and Z, or then you may not have the food you need. You may not have clean water. You may not have the safety of shelter. And so
when you haven't earned it, you don't deserve it.
Well,
like,
and what's interesting
right,
in this
like,
conversation is challenging, because what we're saying is that's crap, but this is what's the truth. But then how do we have this conversation in a way that's not tone deaf and saying,
right.
This is the truth, but this is the very real reality of many people in our global family, And so I think for me, it's like shaking, like, the cobwebs of this mentality, almost like this, shaking the cobwebs of this go along with it mentality. And I think that's true, not just of this conversation, but a lot of conversations. But let's focus it on this one. I think we've gone with this go along with it mentality.
Yeah.
And I think when we began to in our own situations be like, no, that sounds like crap. I'm calling BS on that. and begin to then move in a different way where we're not, I think that's an important first step. Now, I think another step is to go beyond that and really being actively involved in our communities and building systems that do not support this, that don't support this idea that we have just gone along with. Systems and communities that support one another, that engage one another, that provide for one another, that kind of step into this communal understanding, what it means to be in community, instead of this rugged individualism, which we talk about a lot. I'm telling you, it's like the downfall of a lot of things. I mean, really, if you trace a lot of the systemic things that we have, not only in, the world out there, but also in our kind of like spiritual communities, you can trace it back to that rugged individualism.
Yeah.
And wow, it seems like that is the key. And I think we're seeing it more and more. People are waking up to the fact that, I don't have to go it alone. I don't want to have to do this alone. I want to earn a living. I mean, what does that mean? I don't want to have to do this alone. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in these movers and shakers and this kind of social justice movement, and just all these organizations and these community, grassroots organizers of really bringing people together collectively, feeding people, clothing people, housing people, just teaching us how to care for one another. I think that's it.
That right
That's
there.
it.
Yeah.
I think we've forgotten how to care for one another, and then everything else stems from that.
Yeah. And I so just keep coming back to that, and even beyond like the finances abundance conversation.
Right.
And well, I guess that's the interesting thing, right? Like, if we back up the last couple of series that we've done, we did a series on like the body, a series on emotions, a series on like community and whatever, a series on like spiritual ecology, and that each series built on one another. I mean, even more than we ever even thought they would have. And so that's so fascinating, because to me, when we get to this conversation, what I view as the abundance conversation continues to build on that.
Mm-hmm.
My experience with how the prosperity conversation goes is all of a sudden there's like this off ramp, and it's this totally different because it's like, how do we play the money game? And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I don't know how to play that game without playing it at the expense of, because the money game is this completely human-made system that we've put in place that is based wholly on climbing the ladder, but the ladder is made up of other people.
Well, and isn't it interesting? When you were talking about that, it made me think about, it kind of goes back to that belonging versus fitting in. And so kind of that, what we're realizing is that, we have been working to fit in, and it feels uncomfortable. It feels uncomfortable the more, for me, like the more I become aware of like, that doesn't seem right. And then I continue to have the same relationship to it that I have. I'm like, it gets more and more uncomfortable because you're having to fit in, you're having to change what your truth, change your values, change like who you are in order to fit into something that is broken. Yeah. Whereas belonging, I see that kind of like abundance, Yeah. And so this kind of like a prosperity idea can almost be, I guess, the Buddhist idea of near enemy. So it's kind of the near enemy of abundance. It kind of looks like abundance, but when you get really down and dirty with it, it actually undermines this understanding of abundance.
Because there isn't
so similar.
There is an abundance of money. It's just being like hoarded in this one place.
Yeah.
Like, there's way more than enough. There is absolutely way more than enough. But we've built systems and barriers to keep it in certain places and out of certain places. And I just going back to, what you're saying before about caring for each other. I think a lot of what I see showing up is this it's really easy to like stand in that really like double down on the old school like metaphysical, like your entire experience is like your thoughts create your reality 100% of the time, and so everything you're seeing, everything you're experiencing is yours to take responsibility for. And and
We're
like
not alone in doing that, aren't we?
right.
Not in
And
a
so
vacuum.
I think what's happened is there is all of this unspoken misunderstanding that happens. It's like we those who have taught, and maybe not everyone, I don't know, but the way I have seen it taught a lot over and over, and the way that people continue to come to me about it is that the unspoken part gets filled, like we are leaving it empty for people to fill in the blank. And the logical blank is, oh, I am to blame for.
Yeah.
Fill in the, like, I'm to blame for the experience I'm in. I'm to blame for the financial, what, right? And it's like, no, that's
Like
not.
what's in your consciousness, sort of.
Yeah. And I think it's really easy to skip over that. What's like, we haven't, like, the prosperity classes don't talk about that gap. You know, if we're talking specifically prosperity, right? Like they don't talk about that gap. You know, we kind of talk about that gap, like, you know, if it's in a class, and, you know, I mean, there's always like the typical things that come up, and you know, like we would never blame somebody for their illness. And yet, if taught in a specific way, the gap makes it sure sound like the blame, you are to blame for this happening. And it's like, no, that's not, that's
And
never it.
discounts, it discounts the experiences of individuals. And like you said, we aren't created in a vacuum. We have this collective, this collective awareness of lack, this collective awareness of us versus them. I mean, these are ideas that are kind of swimming around.
Yeah.
Now, we as individuals may not have, added our, 2 cents to that, but because it's in the collective, it exists within our awareness. And so then it becomes our responsibility to, look at, what am I adding to that? Or what am I adding to something different? And this conversation sometimes gets really frustrating because it's like, oh, there's these systems and things that we've created. And it really is just hard for sometimes the truth of abundance to kind of squeeze through, because it's all these things that are blocked. But it's interesting because we talk about systems and frameworks that we've created. Oh, but the really exciting part of that is that if we've created these things, we, a collective we, then we can actually create something different.
Yeah, we can uncreate them.
Right. And so it's interesting, by the mere fact that we have created, it just kind of supports our power to actually create things, and that we can actually begin to have these conversations, realize the areas that need to shift, and then begin to create frameworks. And I do think it's happening. I think a lot of people are like, what's going on? I think, the pressures over the past few years, all sorts of things that we're experiencing in our world, it's kind of pushing us in that direction of like, wait, I thought this was supposed to work, and oh no, it's not working. Okay, now what do we do? And I think we have a lot of amazing,
and
brilliant people that are having this conversation with us.
And isn't that kind of the fascinating part? Like, it can be challenging to take ourselves, it may be challenging to take ourselves out of the day-to-day. But when we take that like elevated perspective and we look at the systems that aren't working, like the systems are, I mean, my opinion is the system, so many of the systems that are around are so they're just crumbling in front of us. And what the remnants of them, the things that are hanging on to the way the system worked, it makes it seem even worse, I think, in the places where the system was not working to begin with, it seems even worse now. And yet, from this elevated perspective, don't the systems need to crumble for there's something like, isn't that it?
Yeah.
Not the system, but isn't that the whole thing? Isn't that it working? Like, isn't it working? It's taken a long time because I think we made really bad collective decisions, but the crumbling is let it crumble, and I think part of that, like you're saying about this whole rugged individual thing, especially within the prosperity teachings, the rugged individual, like you're supposed to be, like you are supposed to earn your living.
Yeah.
Earn it. You on your own need to go earn the thing, which is, I mean, I think we've gone through that enough.
Yeah,
like
we beat that one up enough.
But the idea that to learn your living, to learn about yourself, to learn about the way the world works, I think naturally brings us to this place of like, oh yeah, right, we are in this together. Like we have to care for each other. We have to work together, which is so directly opposite to the idea of the rugged individual, where you are supposed to go and do the work. Now, that doesn't mean we don't all need to continue our personal growth journeys, right? Like that's still a very real thing. But the personal growth journey is so much more interconnected with everyone else's personal growth journey. Mm-hmm. And certainly, like, I mean, connected to the whole, like the collective of us all, and how we are each playing into that and taking appropriate responsibility.
Well, and if you look at like our outward system and world, however you want to call it, I know we say systems and frameworks a lot. I don't really have a better word for it, so that's what I'm going to use.
Yeah.
But if you look at that, the outer system, it is reflective of an inner system. It's reflective of our inner systems, our collective inner systems. And so there's no way to actually shift the outward system until we begin to individually shift our own system, within ourselves. And that's like exactly what you're talking about, this relationship to yourself, this learning about yourself, learning about just kind of getting acquainted, like, what do you value? What are the things that are important to you? How, what are the things that you want to show up at, whatever those things are. And I think that's part of this ongoing kind of journey as we begin to, and it's interesting, the frameworks and systems and things that we've kind of operated in, for me at least, I've noticed they seem to cover certain aspects of myself. And so so it's interesting when I made a shift from a more from the corporate sort of system into this full-time ministry system. It was like a culture shock. And like the framework of that system, the parts that work and parts that didn't work, were kind of revealed in that shift. And then I was like, I don't know who I am, in certain aspects, because those things had been kind of covering it. And so it can be a bit of a culture shock. This is not easy stuff. And it is a bit of uncomfortable, because you're like, oh, I haven't been here before. Not really sure how to move and not really sure what to do. And so then I think the encouragement thing is, like, when you feel uncomfortable, hang in the discomfort like a minute longer than you think you could, and then that's when we began to really be like, oh, okay, this is how I want to, this is how I want to show up. And then we can begin to actually have that same grace and compassion for other people, and then begin to care for people in their own sort of evaluation of their own inner system. And then it just automatically shifts what we see. It just does. I mean, we've seen that time and time again with, and these little pockets of change, these little pockets of change where a community showed up in a certain way to care for one another, communal garden, communal living, all this sort of just caring for one another. And like the whole dynamic of that little community changed, and how each and every person could show up more freely as themselves, because it was a different container they were operating in. I mean, we've seen it in pockets. And so we know it works. It's just beginning to become the catalyst for it in a larger scale.
Yeah. And I just want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about not wanting to seem tone deaf,
No.
because it's so easy to go to those places of that self-empowerment.
Yeah.
And I just that there are so many different versions of what self-empowerment looks like. And I think what that looks like also begins to change more and more as newer, as the up and coming frameworks continue to up and come. I think that those opportunities for self-empowerment change, right? Because it's like, for someone who is born into a situation where, everybody in the family has got to get a job as soon as they can to help support paying bills and getting food on the table,
Right.
To no fault of their own, that journey is going to look really different than someone with a privilege, with the leg up, starting not in that place, right? Starting wherever. Like, I think it's this wide range of what that looks like. But I think the important piece about that is the looking inward to decide what it is we believe about the outward, rather than the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the self-empowerment is, no matter where we are.
Yeah.
And the unspoken part about that is, and that doesn't mean we're immediately changing the way the world exists.
Yeah.
Right. So like, privilege is still privilege, and underprivilege is still underprivilege, right? I mean, like, the systems still have these things in place. Does that mean that they're permanently cemented? Not necessarily. But it doesn't mean, now that we're talking about this, let's take on responsibility for the fact that those things, like, for the people blocked by the barriers, to not take on the responsibility for that barrier, unless all of a sudden you're in a position to change those barriers, right? Like, it's a very nuanced conversation, I think, in that way. But there is still self-empowerment in looking inward to decide what we believe about the world around us, right? Looking outward, the world around us says you need to earn your living, and so you need to work 3 jobs so that you can earn your living. And if you're not earning your worth, you're valued enough, if you're not earning the merit to experience life, then you're not working hard enough. Like, that's what the world outside of us says.
Yeah.
When we look inward, it's totally different.
Yeah.
And we can kind of take this breath, and it's like, all right, I don't know how this immediately changes where we're at right now, but like, one conscious thought at a time does start to shift the environment around us and create change.
Yeah.
And there is that place of self-empowerment that's available to all of us, because that is that's the natural law.
Yes.
Like, the law of abundance says everybody, not some people, everybody has that ability. Everybody has that, that power within. Everybody's thoughts create when we are aware of them and can use them consciously to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, and talk about nuance. I mean, everybody's thoughts create all the time, whether we know it or not, based on how, I mean, that's a whole other thing, right?
Yeah. Let's not get too far off of there.
Yeah. But I think that, like, for me, that's the piece that has probably gone underspoken a lot, is that nuance of, I think traditional logic says you take responsibility or you take blame, that they're like opposing things. And I think that the logic of universal principle, like universal truth, is just because you didn't know before and you know now doesn't mean, like, responsibility now doesn't mean blame from before.
Yeah. All good stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is the thing. That is the shift, no matter where one is that relationship to the outer world, our ability to see within, and sometimes that's hard, but I think you're right. I think that is the, like, kind of that really subtle thing that we can do right now, and it may not seem earth shattering, but I think, collectively it begins to create really powerful transformation, not only individually, but collectively.
Yeah. And especially when we realize that interconnectedness and the compassion that goes along, like the compassion that's available, like compassion in abundance. I mean, holy cow. Like we talked earlier, maybe it was last week, about this idea of finding the thing that is yours to give away. Yeah. And when we get to do that, it switches our entire stance. And now we are serving each other. We are all of a sudden here to serve each other. And like, I need all of you for me to be in service. I can't be in service if there's no one else.
Right. I think what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing.
Yeah.
Really, like, and for me, we talk about interconnectedness, but interbeing has this really tight knit energy about it. And I think that when we become more aware of that, the presence of our interbeing with one another, I think that it collectively we can begin to shift.
Yeah.
That awareness.
And then the whole sense of worth and what we earn and the money we have. And I mean, just all of the things I think begin to shift when we come from a place of caring for each other, working with each other, creating with each other. It's like, it's a whole other world.
So it's Nacho Supreme.
It's Nacho Supreme. Yeah.
Right.
It's like table nachos with all the toppings.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being with us here in Truth Be Told. And I just wanted to give a quick little bit of information. I know that we had it in the little infomercial, but I just wanted to plug one more time. The O-Shift Healing the Divide Summit, that is on November 14th through the 17th. We have some amazing speakers lined up. We have Reverend Dr. Edwin Vilhune, the spiritual director for CSL. We have Reverend Cindy Grimes. We have Reverend Kamatara Johnson, some powerhouses that are really doing this work in the world in their own little sphere, having these conversations and really working to bring communities and individuals together collectively. So it's going to be an amazing event where we can learn to begin to heal the divide and to be in generative conversation and generative ways of being with one another. So you can go on our website and register for that. So I just want to plug that one more time. It's going to be an amazing event. And so thank you once again for participating with us and listening to us as we begin to have these conversations that are really exciting and empowering us to really move in some new and different ways, maybe for some of us. And so if you're really jabbing with this conversation, want to go a little bit deeper, join us on Thursdays for the gathering. You can sign up for that on our website. So if we don't see you next week, if we don't see you Thursday, rather, we will see you here next week. Have a great week.